My daughter-in-law erased me from the family photo, so I erased her name from the deed. Enough! My family photo cannot be ruined by an ugly old woman. The venomous voice of my daughter-in-law kept ringing in my ears as I accidentally heard it while cleaning up the storage room just behind a wall. The first time I saw the photo, I was sitting in my armchair, a lukewarm cup of tea on the side table, and my reading glasses slipping down the bridge of my nose. It was a chilly Sunday after Thanksgiving, and I was doing what most grandmothers do on quiet afternoons, scrolling through social media to feel, somehow, included in the lives I helped build. There it was, a family photo, on my daughter-in-law's Facebook page, taken on the front porch of the house I helped pay for. Framed with pumpkins and plaid blankets, all the little ones in matching scarves. My son stood tall, proud, with one arm wrapped around her waist, and their 2 children perched on either side like perfect little ornaments. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was glowing. Except for one thing. I wasn't in it. But I had been. I knew I had. I stood right there, beside them on that porch, hands folded neatly in front of me, wearing the blue cardigan my late husband loved. I remember brushing the lint off it just before they took the picture. So where was I? I scrolled through the comments. Such a beautiful family. You all look amazing. Picture perfect. Then I saw it. One friend asked, "Was your mother-in-law not there?" And her reply, casual like a tossed napkin, "Oh, she was there, but she looked off in the photo. I just cropped it to keep it clean. You know how lighting is." I stared at the words. Not angry. Not sad. Just hollow. It wasn't just that she cropped me out of the picture. It was how easy it was for her to do it, how naturally she explained away my absence, how comfortable she felt erasing me from a memory we shared. I waited a few minutes before calling her. I don't know why I called. Habit, maybe. Some small, foolish hope that this was all a misunderstanding. She picked up after the 3rd ring. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly. Too brightly. "I saw the picture," I said. A pause, then a sigh. "Oh, that. Yeah, sorry if that upset you. It's just, well, the photo didn't flatter you. You were kind of squinting and your cardigan made the colors look dull. I wanted it to be clean, aesthetically pleasing. You understand." "I understand you cut me out," she chuckled. "Don't take it personally. It's just a photo." Just a photo. I wanted to say something. I really did, but I didn't. Because something settled into me, low and heavy. This wasn't the first time I'd been erased. It had been happening for years, little by little, smile by smile, silence by silence. I remembered the birthday party 2 years ago when I wasn't seated at the main table. The Christmas where they forgot to buy me a gift, but made sure the dog had his own stocking. The school play where my name wasn't listed on the grandparent visitors list. The Mother's Day brunch I wasn't invited to. This photo wasn't an accident. It was a final confirmation. I was no longer part of their picture. Not just on Facebook, but in life. That evening, I took out an old album. Real photographs. Bent corners, smudged edges. I ran my fingers over each one. There I was, holding my son at the hospital, his face red and wrinkled. There I was at his graduation, at his wedding, carrying platters into their first home. I had been in every photo that mattered. Until now. When I finally called my son, he sounded tired. "She didn't mean anything by it, Mom." "Did you ask her to take me out of it?" "No, of course not. But you saw the edited photo?" He hesitated. "Yeah. And you said nothing." Another pause. Then, softer. "It's not worth making a fuss over. You're being sensitive." That's when I knew. They weren't just erasing me from pictures. They were erasing me from the family narrative. I wasn't the grandmother who helped raise their kids. I wasn't the woman who co-signed the mortgage. I wasn't the one who stayed behind when their father died, making sure no one fell apart. I was the blur in the corner of the photo, the person they cropped out for aesthetics. I put down the phone. That night, I didn't cry. I folded laundry, I watered the plants, I cooked a pot of soup too big for one person, and then I opened my file cabinet. There, beneath tax papers and insurance forms, was the deed to the house, and there, next to my son's name, was hers. I ran my finger across it slowly, not with bitterness, with clarity. They erased me from a photo, but I had the power to erase something too, not to hurt, but to correct the story. To remind them, I may be quiet, I may be soft, but I am not invisible. When my son got married, I cried harder than I expected, not from sadness, but from a quiet kind of pride, the kind that slips down your cheeks when no one's watching. He wore his late father's cufflinks. I'd polished them the night before. His bride was radiant, her family large and talkative, with opinions and expectations they weren't shy about. I sat quietly at the reception, toasted politely, smiled when prompted. No one knew the check I'd written to cover part of the caterer's fee, or the overtime hours I'd picked up cleaning offices at night to make sure my dress didn't come off the rack at a thrift store. I never told anyone. That became a habit, doing things in the background, quietly, without thanks. The first apartment they rented after the honeymoon was too small for the dreams they had. They wanted a house, a starter home, they said, but the market was brutal, and the bank was strict, so I did what mothers do when their children are too proud to ask, but too worried to sleep. I sold my car. Not the fancy kind, just a dependable sedan, but it was mine. Paid off, maintained, and familiar. I traded it in for a few $1,000s and walked to the grocery store for months. My neighbors thought I was just trying to stay active. I let them believe it. Then I did something even bolder. I took out a loan against the insurance policy my late husband had left me. It wasn't much, but with that and my savings, I scraped together the down payment. I handed it to my son in a manila envelope one rainy afternoon. He didn't ask how I got it. His hands trembled when he took it, but he kissed my cheek and said, "Thank you, Mom. We'll pay you back." I smiled, not because I believed him, but because I didn't need it back. They moved in 3 months later, a modest single-story house with a red front door and a patchy lawn that I offered to mow myself. No, you don't have to," my daughter-in-law said, waving me off. "We'll get someone." They never did. The grass grew long until the city sent warnings, and then my son called me. "Mom, can you check on the house this week? We're out of town." I brought my own shears and garbage bags, trimmed the hedges, picked up trash, made sure it looked like a home someone cared about. I didn't live there. I wasn't even invited to stay overnight, but I paid the property taxes every year, quietly. I stood in line at the county office, wrote the check, and never told a soul. Why? Because my name was on the deed, not as a backup, not as a favor. I was listed as a co-owner. We had agreed if anything happened, the house wouldn't be lost. It was security, protection, a foundation for them and a little peace for me. But that, too, was something I never spoke of. What kind of mother demands gratitude for helping her child? What kind of woman keeps score of sacrifices? Not me. I let them think they built it all themselves. That's what they needed. And for years it was enough for me. I watched from the sidelines. Birthdays, anniversaries, new jobs, even the baby showers. I showed up, always with a gift, always with a dish, always just late enough not to be in the center of the photos. I told myself that was fine. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted a place at the table, a place in their life. But slowly, my seat kept moving further from the center until I was outside the frame entirely. It wasn't sudden. First came the "we're doing a smaller thing this year, just friends" explanation for a skipped holiday. Then the "she needs space as a mom, you know how overwhelming it gets" excuse when I wasn't called to help with the babies. Then the "we'll drop by sometime" that never happened. And still I paid the taxes. Still I sent birthday cards. Still I let them believe it was their home alone, because I thought that was love. Now, as I sit in this quiet living room, scrolling through a picture I wasn't deemed fit to be part of, I realize something. They never asked how I was doing. Not once. Not after I gave up the car. Not when I stopped buying new clothes. Not even when I missed a doctor's appointment because I was watching their sick child. It wasn't just that I was invisible. It was that they believed I had nothing worth seeing. No value, no voice, no place. But they were wrong. Because while they erased me from photos, I kept the receipts. Not just financial, but emotional. Every overlooked moment, every unacknowledged gift, every act of love disguised as quiet presence. I remembered it all, and now I was starting to realize maybe it was time they remembered too. It started with the locks. One day I arrived with a tin of cookies and a small sweater I'd knitted for my grandson, only to find my key no longer fit the front door. I jiggled it, thinking I'd misremembered. until a voice came through the security system. "Hi, this is Sophie, can I help you?" Sophie, my daughter-in-law, speaking to me like a receptionist. "It's me," I said, holding the key up to the tiny camera. "Margaret, I was just dropping something off." A pause, then a too sweet reply. "Oh, sorry, we changed the locks last week. You should have texted first." She opened the door eventually, but not before making me wait on the porch for 7 minutes while the kids stared through the window and giggled. I handed her the cookies. She smiled like I was a stranger. "Thanks. I'll make sure the kids get them." That was the last time I saw the inside of their house without an invitation. From then on, Sophie created boundaries. That was the word she liked to use. Boundaries. "I'm sure you understand," she'd say, patting my hand like I was the child. "Kids need structure, routine. It's not good for them to get too many opinions." She told me not to buy them toys unless she approved first, not to offer snacks unless I cleared it with her, not to mention anything about how we raised children in the old days. "I know you mean well," she'd say with a tight smile, "but it's different now." One afternoon, I asked if I could take the kids to the park. She didn't even look up from her phone. "I don't think that's a good idea. You forget things sometimes, and they're fast. You might not keep up." I stood there holding a picnic blanket and 2 juice boxes. She didn't look up. I went home and cried into a sink of dishes, but the worst was what she said when I wasn't around. At a barbecue that summer, I heard her talking to one of her friends while I was carrying out lemonade. "Oh, Margaret, she's sweet, but she's not really family, you know? She's just around. Like a neighbor, like a shadow, not the woman who held her son's hand through his first heartbreak, not the woman who sold her car to help them buy a home, not the woman who still kept every crayon drawing their children made. No, just around." I started noticing the way she rephrased things when we were in public. When people asked about their support system, she said, "My mom helps sometimes, never me." When the school had a special person's day, she invited her yoga instructor. When the family Christmas card went out, she sent it to friends but not to me. But the moment that broke something in me was at my granddaughter's birthday. She was turning 5. I'd bought her a necklace with a tiny gold heart, a simple piece I'd saved up for because I wanted it to be special. I showed up early, wearing a soft yellow blouse and my best smile. The front yard was full of balloons and folding chairs, but when I walked up the driveway, Sophie stepped in front of me. "Oh, Margaret," she said, blocking the gate with her body. "Today's just for the kids. We're doing a themed party, fairies and stuff. It's all parents and classmates." "I'm her grandmother," I said, voice quiet. "I know," she replied quickly, glancing toward the guests, "but we don't want to confuse the little ones with too many adults they don't recognize. It's just easier this way." I stood there with the necklace in my hand. I looked past her, at the streamers and the cupcakes and the tiny wings on the backs of the children. I saw my granddaughter twirling on the grass, laughing, and I wasn't allowed in. "I understand," I said, because I always said that. She took the necklace and said she'd give it to her later. I don't know if she ever did. I walked back to my car slowly, the afternoon sun warm on my back, but my chest cold. In the rearview mirror, I saw them all gathering for a group photo. Sophie in the center, my son beside her, my grandchildren in her arms. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even on the lawn. And in that moment I realized I was no longer a mother-in-law, no longer a grandmother, no longer anything they couldn't Photoshop out. They didn't ask me to leave. They just made sure I never felt welcome enough to stay. The invitation came in a group text, an afterthought among a list of family members, friends, and neighbors. "Birthday dinner for Dad, Saturday at 6 p.m. Dress smart casual. Food, drinks, and fun. No hope you can come. No looking forward to seeing you. Just a line item and a mass message like an event bulletin." But I still went, because it was her father's birthday, because I still remembered when her family was new to mine, because I hoped, deep down, foolishly, that maybe this time would be different. I wore a dark green dress with pearl buttons. Simple, neat, respectful. I brought a bottle of wine wrapped in ribbon and a card I'd written by hand with careful cursive like my mother taught me. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. Music drifted from the backyard, and laughter poured over the fence like smoke. I walked through the side gate and stood for a moment, watching. Long tables stretched across the lawn, lights strung overhead, wine glasses catching the golden dusk. My son was at the grill, my grandchildren were chasing bubbles, Sophie was at the center, laughing loudly, radiant. No one noticed me at first. When they did, it was like an interruption. "Oh, hi," someone said. "You made it." A few polite nods, no hugs. No, "We saved you a seat." I hovered near the buffet table until Sophie finally walked over. "Glad you came," she said, eyes scanning past me. "Where should I sit?" I asked. She pointed to a small table near the edge of the yard, a fold-out, 3 chairs, one of them already occupied by the housekeeper. "You don't mind, do you?" Sophie asked. "We're keeping it cozy in the main area for immediate family." I smiled, but I could feel it trembling at the corners. I sat down. The housekeeper nodded, surprised. I poured her a glass of water and tried not to notice the way people looked over occasionally, puzzled, as if wondering why the help was having dinner with someone else from the staff. When the toast began, no one mentioned me. Not my name, not my help over the years, not the countless favors I'd done for that household. Sophie stood, clinked her glass, and said, "To my amazing father, who raised me right, who taught me what family means, and who gave me the strength to set boundaries even when it's uncomfortable." People clapped. She looked straight at me. Later, as dessert was being served, one of the guests, someone from her work, I think, asked quietly, "And who is that lady, the one in green?" Sophie leaned over and whispered, just loud enough for the table to hear, "Oh, that's just Margaret. She's always around. Just Dora." A familiar phrase. I pushed my cake away. The final blow came when I stood to help clear plates, just wanting to be useful, to feel part of something. "Mom," Sophie said sharply, loud enough to stop conversation. "You don't have to. Just sit. You like being quiet anyway, so just enjoy it." There was a flicker of laughter. Someone muttered, "Ouch." I nodded, walked slowly back to the little table by the hedge. And then I stood up again. I picked up my coat, my purse, left the wine unopened on the gift table, left the card with the others, though now I knew she'd never read it. No one stopped me. I walked across the lawn under the string lights, past the chatter and the cheer, past the faces who would forget I was even there. At the gate, I turned back one last time, and I saw them. My son with his arm around his wife, my grandchildren running in circles, and me, standing outside of all of it. Not forgotten, just dismissed, like I was the woman who used to clean, who helped raise someone else's children, who used to belong to a house that now had no room for her name. As I walked back to my car, I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt had turned into something else, something sharper, something stronger, clarity. I was no longer welcome in their picture, but I still held the frame. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when nothing seems important until everything is. I had come by the house to drop off a box of winter coats I'd saved from when my son was little, coats I thought my grandchildren might like, vintage, warm, and lined with the kind of care you don't find in stores anymore. No one answered the front door, but the gate to the side yard was open. I figured I'd leave the box on the porch with a note. As I stepped quietly along the gravel path, I heard her voice. "Sophie?" At first I thought she was speaking to the dog, something clipped and condescending, like, "always." But then I heard my name. "Just let her think she's still on the deed. It keeps her happy. No need to stir the pot." My hand froze on the porch railing. Then a male voice, my son's, muffled, hesitant. "I don't know, it just feels wrong." "She's old," Sophie snapped. "She doesn't use the space. We're paying all the bills now. She'll be better off in a facility with people her age." Silence. Then she said it. The phrase that knocked the air from my lungs. "End of the year, we'll move her into assisted living. I've already toured a few places, nice ones. She won't even know what hit her." I stepped back slowly, my hand gripping the porch column so tightly it hurt. The box fell from my other arm and landed with a thud. Inside, the voices stopped. I didn't wait. I turned, walked back through the gate, past the little herb garden I had planted with my grandson, past the broken paver stone I had offered to fix last spring. I didn't cry. I drove straight home, the car too quiet, the sun too bright. My hands stayed clenched at 10 and 2, my shoulders stiff with something I hadn't felt in years, resolve. At home, I walked to the hallway closet, the one with the fireproof box. I pulled out the folder labeled Property Documents and sat at the kitchen table. There it was, the deed, my name in print, black ink, legal and binding. My son's name was there too. Hers was added later, in smaller type, beneath his. I pulled out the spare copy, the one I had kept for myself, though I had told no one, and I picked up the phone. "Henry," I said when the lawyer answered, "it's Margaret. I think it's time we had a conversation about removing someone from my property." He paused. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Henry was the one who helped me draft the documents years ago, who advised me to keep control even when I offered generosity. He always said, "You can give without surrendering. Be kind, not foolish." I had tried to be both. Now, I was just done. That night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The stars were faint, the street quiet. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about winning. I was thinking about how many years I had given, without asking anything back. How many holidays I spent alone so they could have their space. How many birthdays I celebrated with nothing more than a voicemail and a late card in the mail. And now they wanted to move me out like a piece of furniture. They wanted me tucked away, silent, stored. They wanted the house, the life, the legacy. But I still had the pen. They forgot that. They forgot the one thing Sophie couldn't erase with a photo crop or a closed-door party. I was still the owner, still the mother, still here. And I was done waiting for a seat at the table. I was ready to reclaim the whole room. It took less than 2 weeks to remove her name. Henry made the arrangements quietly, discreetly, with a kind of reverence that only comes from knowing the weight behind the signatures. He didn't ask why. He already knew. I sat across from him in his office, hands steady, voice calm. The papers were stacked neatly, the ink flowing dark and permanent. "There's a final clause," I said. "I want it added to the transfer." He adjusted his glasses. "Go ahead." "If I pass away," I said, pausing for just a breath, "the property will be donated to the Women's Support Shelter on 8th Street, the one that helps women start over." He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. "That's a bold choice." "No," I said softly. "It's the only just one." He understood. It was never about revenge. It was about returning the value of that home, the space, the safety, the roof, to someone who might actually need it. Someone who, like me once, had nowhere else to go. The house had been my sanctuary. It had been my sacrifice, and for years I had let others treat it like a trophy. But now? Now it would become a refuge. We signed the final documents, the notary stamped her seal, and just like that, Sophie was erased, not from anger, not from hate, but from the page she never deserved to be on in the first place. I left Henry's office with a certified copy in my purse and a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Back home, I packed slowly, not because I was sad, but because I was deliberate. Every drawer, every photo frame, every little dish had a memory attached. I kept only what I had brought into the house myself, my wedding ring, my needlepoint kit, a few favorite books. I left the rest for them. Let them decorate with someone else's life. As I taped the last box shut, I looked around the living room. I remembered painting those walls with my husband. I remembered rocking my baby boy to sleep in the corner by the fireplace. I remembered baking holiday cookies in that kitchen long before Sophie ever stepped foot through that door. This house had seen my best years, but it would not hold my last. I left a note on the kitchen counter, not to them, but to the shelter who would one day inherit it. This house was built on sacrifice. May it now become a place of restoration. Then I locked the door one last time. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I didn't know them that. Let them come home one day and find their key no longer fits. Let them call Henry and ask what happened. Let the silence speak louder than any confrontation ever could. Because I wasn't walking away in anger. I was walking toward freedom. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment on the other side of town. Modest, quiet, with a view of the garden, and a neighbor who brought fresh bread every Tuesday. No gate codes, no cold stairs, no permission needed. The first morning I woke up there, I brewed coffee and let it steep slowly. I opened the window and let the breeze in. I played Billie Holiday on an old record player I'd nearly forgotten I owned. And I smiled. because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was intruding on my own life. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and fresh paper. I began to write, not to them, but for me. My story, my sacrifices, my truth. Because they had spent years erasing me from the narrative. Now it was my turn to write the ending. And it would not be quiet. It would be strong. It would be certain. It would be mine. The apartment I rented was on the second floor of a sun-washed building near the coast. Nothing grand, a small balcony, a lemon tree out front, and neighbors who nodded hello without expecting anything more. It was perfect. The sea was just 5 blocks away. I walked there most mornings, letting the salt air settle into my lungs, grounding myself in the rhythm of waves and seagulls and strangers who didn't know my name and didn't need to. No one asked me where I'd come from. No one asked who I belonged to, and I found that liberating. At the market, I ran into Nancy, an old friend from the library board I'd served on decades ago. We exchanged polite surprises, and before I knew it, she was inviting me to Tuesday tea with her circle of retired teachers and widows. I went once, and then I never stopped. We sat in sunrooms sipping chamomile, trading stories that had waited too long to be told. Stories of husbands who forgot anniversaries, of children who forgot phone calls, of dreams we tucked away in drawers for decades. We laughed. We swore sometimes. We reminded each other that our softness had always been a choice, not a weakness. One woman crocheted political slogans into doilies. Another ran a secret wine club for her church choir. We were old, yes, but we were not gone. Back home, I began stretching in the morning. Nothing fancy, just gentle movement to keep my joints awake. I played soft music and lit lavender candles. I cooked full meals, even if I ate them alone. I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, my time was my own. I didn't wait for calls that never came. I didn't check the mailbox for belated invitations or thank you notes that never arrived. Instead, I wrote. I opened a blank journal and filled it page after page with memories I had carried in silence for too long. The nights I slept with one ear open when my son had a fever. The weeks I skipped meals so he could go to summer camp. The moment I handed over a check for a down payment without asking anything in return. I wrote it all, not for pity, not for applause, but to remind myself I was there. I mattered. I loved. And they didn't get to erase that. The journal grew thick. I began organizing it, chaptering the years, cataloging the lessons. I didn't call it a memoir. I called it evidence. Evidence of a life fully lived. Some evenings, I read back through old entries and found myself smiling, not bitterly, but fondly. Because even in the heartbreak, there had been beauty. Even in the betrayal, there had been resilience. One morning, I received a letter in the mail. Not from them, from the shelter. They thanked me, not just for the future donation, but for the note I'd left. A house built on sacrifice, a place of restoration. They said they'd read it aloud in a staff meeting. One of the younger caseworkers cried. That meant more to me than any holiday card or forced apology ever could. Somewhere out there, a woman might sleep soundly one day because of the choices I made. A child might have a warm room and a quiet corner to read in. That was enough. More than enough. On Sunday afternoons, I now bake bread. The smell reminds me of my own mother, her hands flour-dusted and patient. I write her name in my journal too, Agnes, because she was the first woman who taught me that silence can be holy, but it should never be mistaken for surrender. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting anymore. I am just here, in my own space, in my own rhythm, in my own life. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I am not afraid to take up space in it. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, thick and official. It was addressed to my son, sent by Henry, the lawyer who had once helped us set up the original property deed. The same lawyer now carrying out my final act of clarity. Inside were 3 items. The first, a newly certified certificate of land use rights. My name stood alone now. Sophie's name was gone, legally, permanently. The second, a notarized transfer of ownership contract, stipulating that upon my death, the house would be gifted in full to the Women's Support Shelter. It was airtight, signed, sealed, and untouchable. The third, a letter, handwritten. No bitterness in its ink, just quiet truth. I once stood behind that house, behind its mortgage, behind its upkeep, behind its holidays and repairs and quiet safety, behind every memory they now try to curate without me. But I no longer stand behind anyone. I stand on my own, and I do not ask to be seen. I simply insist on no longer being erased. I don't know what my son did when he read it. I don't know what Sophie said when she realized her name no longer mattered, not in the legal documents, not in the narrative, not in the legacy. But I know what I did. I brewed tea, I lit a candle, and I opened my window to let in the salt air, knowing the house I once gave everything to now belonged to a future of healing, not entitlement. Sophie had spent years trying to curate the family image, to filter me out like I was a flaw in her backdrop. But legal ink doesn't smudge like digital pixels. This time, I was the editor. And this edit? It was final. Not cruel, not vengeful, just true. Because I didn't take anything back. I didn't demand repayment. I didn't drag them through court. I simply reclaimed my space, my name, my voice, my worth. I didn't burn the house down. I just took back the match and walked away. Weeks passed. The calls didn't come. I wasn't surprised. I had stopped expecting apologies long ago. What I didn't expect, though, was the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, only my name, carefully written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. My son's handwriting. Mom, I don't know how to start this. Sophie is furious, as I'm sure you guessed. She says you embarrassed her, that you made a scene without ever showing up. But I know better. You didn't make a scene, you made a decision. And maybe that's what hurts most. How clean and silent it was, how powerful. I went through the documents. Everything checks out. Everything's legal. Henry made sure of it. I guess I always knew your name was there, but I didn't realize what it meant. Not until it disappeared from our lives in every other way. I've been thinking about all the things I never asked you, like how you managed after Dad died, how you paid for things without ever letting me see the strain, how many times you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. I want you to know something. I saw the photo Sophie cropped you out of. I didn't stop her. I should have. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, but if there's room in your life for me to visit, without pretense, without her, I'd like that. Love, James. I folded the letter slowly, not with tears, not with rage, but with that old ache mothers know too well, the one that lives just beneath the rib cage, where memory and muscle collide. I didn't call him. Not yet. Instead, I took a walk to the ocean. The wind was brisk that day, carrying the scent of salt and something faintly floral. Along the path, a group of children were collecting seashells in buckets, their laughter unburdened and wide. One little girl turned and waved at me. I waved back. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Let him come. Let him walk the path back, if he's willing. But I will not meet him in the place where I once begged to be seen. I will be here, whole, steady, already home." The next week, a volunteer from the shelter stopped by my apartment. She was young, early 20s maybe, and she held a clipboard nervously as she stood at my door. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for the donation, for the house. We're renovating it now, making room for mothers with children. A fresh start." I invited her in, poured her tea. She asked why I gave them the house, and I said simply, because no one should be made to feel like a guest in their own life. She wrote that down. A few days later, I visited the house, quietly. The curtains were new, the lawn was mowed. The door once locked to me stood wide open. Inside, women moved gently through the space, setting tables, folding laundry, guiding toddlers with soft voices and warm eyes. No one asked who I was. I just stood for a moment in the hallway, near the spot where Sophie once told me to stay quiet, and I listened, not for shouting, not for conflict, but for peace. And I heard it, the soft hum of safety, the rhythm of women rebuilding, the echo of silence that no longer meant exile, but ease. That night, I baked 2 loaves of banana bread. One I delivered to the shelter, the other I kept, just in case, because maybe James would come, and if he did, I would greet him not with a lecture, but with a slice of bread, a cup of tea, and a question, "Are you ready to see me now?" Not as background, not as burden, but as someone who never stopped loving, even when she walked away. This isn't a story about revenge, it's a story about return. return to self, return to dignity, return to truth. And while I don't know how it ends, I know this. I'm in the picture now, not by invitation, by decision. And this time, I'm not stepping out of frame. If you've ever been edited out of your own life, if you've ever been told to be quiet while others rewrote your story, if you've ever stood in the background of a picture that wouldn't even exist without you, remember this. Silence isn't surrender. Silence is preparation for a response that doesn't shout, because it doesn't need to. You do not need their permission to take back your place. You only need your own truth. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where the forgotten get the last word and the quiet finally speak. Because when a grandma tells her story, the world listens.